Amazing.
Yeah. Six,
Cool.
yeah, we got 6 classes: AI, Scratch, Python, Java, robotics, and game development. Actually, so
Excellent. Excellent.
yeah.
So can I see everybody in here? I see 2 different classrooms. Is that everybody?
Moved everyone into 2 classes, but we're trying to see trying to fit as many people into the view of the camera, but we're doing our best here.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Fair enough. Well, it's great to see you all. I guess first I just want to start off by asking you guys a question. How many people, just by raising your hand, how many people like to play video games?
Yeah, that's pretty much everyone.
Pretty much everybody. Okay. Okay, put your hands down. Put your hands down. I got another question. How many people think they'd like to work on a video game one day?
I'd say that's all of our game dev kids plus 2 from the other classes.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me share. Can you guys enable sharing so I can share my screen?
We're just making you co-host right now.
Cool.
So can you quickly make Mr. Garber co-host?
Yeah, it's done now.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So I'm just going to show you guys a few slides and talk a little bit about the game industry. And there should be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So I really encourage you guys to think about something you want to ask, and don't be afraid to ask at the end. Okay. Cool. Can everybody see the slides I'm showing now? It's got a picture of a yellow robot.
Give a thumbs up.
All right.
Yep.
Great. Cool. So let's just get started. So the first slide is just a little intro to me. It just gives me an excuse to kind of show you what I've done and convince you that I know what I'm talking about. So I've been working in the game industry for about 20 years, and I started doing console games. I've also worked on PC games and also mobile. When I first got my start, I was actually a programmer. That was way back in 2002. And since then, I started leading programming teams and then leading full game teams. I had my own game studio for a while as the head of the studio. And now I'm actually leading game design at a pretty large game company. And here are, just in kind of light gray, are some logos of the companies I've worked at and the games I've worked on. So you can see like the Ratchet and Clank series over here. I worked on Resistance, a Disney game called Disney Magic Kingdoms, a game called Ryan's Super Spy Ryan. So that just kind of shows you a little bit about me. Next, I'm going to show you a big old complicated picture that kind of tells you a little bit about the whole game industry. Because a lot of times we play the games we like to play and we don't realize how much else is going on. And this also shows you a bit of the history of the game industry. So you don't have to worry about all the details. It's basically a timeline. So way over here on the left side, this little point is when games first started. The video game industry first started back in the early 70s. And on the right side, this was basically now, actually 2020. That's as far as this diagram goes. And the colored bands basically show you how popular or successful different types of gaming platforms were during that time. So you can see way back at the beginning, it started all with arcade games. And arcades were the only thing around. And arcades became really popular in the 70s and the 80s. And then this dark blue band sort of fizzles out. And it's not a big deal anymore. Console games also started quite early, back in the early 70s. And then there was the kind of Nintendo, the NES era. And since then, consoles have become pretty stable and successful. You know, we have Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo making very successful games on different consoles. PC also started around the same time, and PC has actually been continuously to grow. And right now, there's actually the PC game industry is actually bigger than consoles. You can see at the top, this black line, kind of dark band here was handheld games like the Game Boy and PS Vita, stuff like that. They sort of came, they were popular for a while, and now they're not. And one of the biggest surprises in gaming is actually the mobile game industry. So that's this big red kind of triangle that started in about the early 90s and was actually a big surprise. I was actually working in the game industry at this time, or more like in the early 2000s. And if you asked us what we thought would be, the next big thing in gaming, we all thought it was going to be just more consoles, and that was going to be the big thing. Nobody would have anticipated that mobile gaming would just become this huge deal. And right now, the mobile game industry is bigger than PC and console combined. So a lot of those games that we don't think of as, really gamey games are what most people play. Right now, the video game industry, so at this time it was, $165 billion. It's now more than that. It's bigger than the film industry and the music industry combined. So, games are a really big industry now, and they're going to keep growing, and it's going to keep changing. There's going to be more surprises. Different platforms may die out, and new platforms may come along. You really don't know what the future might hold. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the different kind of jobs that go into making a game, because there's a lot of different things that most people don't always think about. So first, all of us know about programming technology, right? You guys are in a coding camp. That one should be very clear. That's actually often a big part of the team, but an even bigger part of the team is usually the artists. We need artists to 2D artists to draw the pictures, 3D artists to make the models, animators to actually make the characters move if it's a 3D game. So art teams tend to be the biggest part of a game team, with programming being the second. The third biggest chunk of a game development team is the game designers. So these guys are like the architects of the game, kind of the equivalent of the architects of a house. They make the plans of the game, how it's going to work, maybe for an action game, how the skills work, how the enemies move, what the progression system is. They basically make all those plans so that the artists and programmers can implement the game. Then there's the production team, which tends to be pretty small, but those are the people who kind of lead the team. They put the team together. They make sure everybody knows what they should be working on. They keep everybody on schedule, and basically just make sure the game gets delivered on time. Sound, there's always a few people making the sound for the games and the music. QA, those are the folks who test the games, and it's actually often a pretty big team of people. Nobody wants to play a game with tons of bugs, so somebody's got to try every single thing that's in the game, try to do crazy things, see if they can break it, and find the problem so that the programmers can fix them. Localization. Not a lot of people think about this, but most games are launched in at least 12 languages. So there's a big team of people on kind of large successful games that just translate the game into French or German or Chinese. Marketing. There's a bunch of people on game teams who make all the ads that you see either on TV or on Instagram. And that's how people find out about new games and go to install them. Live Ops is a team of people who work on sort of updating the game and when games are a service. So if you think about your favorite mobile game, if there are events in the game or items in the shop or special sales at Christmas time or special tournaments that go on, the Live Ops team is the team that plans those things and makes them all happen. And they're often also looking at the data for what players do in the game and making adjustments. So if they make something on sale and nobody seems to buy it, well, next time they'll make it a better sale. Stuff like that. And the final team I'll talk about is community management. So that's both people who are on social media, in the forums, answering people's questions. It could also be customer service. Those are the folks you can contact if your account gets hacked, or if you have a bug and something happens wrong in your game, they'll be the people who can help you fix that. And there's actually quite a lot of people who have to do that because, there's a lot of things can go wrong. So that's kind of an overall picture of what different people do in games. Let me tell you a bit about the sizes of game teams, because it can vary a lot. Some games, small indie games, can be made by one person. Some really famous examples are Minecraft. I mean, that was made by one guy when for its first launch. It's not one person now. As the game became really successful, oh, hands are up. Whoa, you guys all know Minecraft. Cool. As the game became really successful, there's now 600 people working on Minecraft, but it started by just one person by themselves doing all of the stuff I kind of mentioned on the previous slide. He did the art, he did the programming, he did his own testing, everything. Most game teams are bigger than that though. And that lets you specialize so that people can have specialized jobs. You don't need one person to do the art and the coding. You can have a dedicated programming team and a dedicated art team. Most game teams are about 25 to 50 people. Fortnite, for example, was created by a team of 25. Okay, you guys play Fortnite, cool. So 25 people. And again, right now, that team is almost 1,000 because the game became very successful and they need to keep making updates and keep adding things to the game. But originally, 25 people was what it took to make that game. And then when you get into big teams, like big AAA games like Assassin's Creed or Grand Theft Auto, these teams are huge. They're often spread across different locations, all working together, 600, 1,000 people, putting all those details in, making the models, making the animations, making everything, as detailed and accurate as they possibly can. Because those games are huge. Okay. And depending on how big the team is, it allows for more specialization. On a smaller team, you maybe have one person coding the whole game or a couple people, but on a team of 1,000 people, you're going to have a whole team that's just coding one part of the game alone, focusing really on one piece to make it perfect. Okay, next, since you guys are a coding camp, I wanted to talk a bit more about programming. So in programming for games, there's really two big specializations, two big divisions of what game programmers do. So the first is the front end. That's everything that runs on the device, on your PC, on your console, on your mobile phone. And to be a front-end programmer, you have to have a bunch of different skills, and it depends on what kind of front-end programming you want to do. So I just put a little word cloud of the kind of stuff that might be involved in front-end programming. So these are the people who actually make the game fun. They're going to be coding the fun parts of the game. Sometimes it's the user interface, like here on this kind of match 3 game, how the little icons move. It might be the game systems, like how the progression system or the energy system works in this game. Might be coding that. It might be the AI for an enemy, like this PC screenshot I showed down here. You could be coding action gameplay, but oftentimes you'll be using things like physics and geometry in your work, because a lot of things that happen in front-end gameplay happen in either a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional space. So you've got to figure out, how things move, how things bounce, how to target from one item, from one character to another. Involves quite a bit of math, actually. Front-end programmers usually work in a game engine, but there's actually some programmers who code the game engine as well. So there are people who do a lot of work on shaders and graphics and stuff like that. And when you're a front-end programmer, you care a lot about the performance and efficiency of what you code, because you want your game to run on a lot of different devices, or at least run efficiently, not lag. So you can't do stuff that's really wasteful. You have to be very careful to make sure things run really well. On the other side of things is back-end coding, which a lot of people do forget about, but it's a big part of making a game. These are all the folks who code the online part and the servers. So they're less concerned about the parts of the game that are maybe the fun bits, but they're concerned about making the game, work, especially if it's a multiplayer game, which nowadays most games are. When you work on the back end of coding, you're primarily working on the server and networking, but you're going to be concerned with things like scalability. What happens if, your game blows up and you have millions and millions of users all logging in? You don't want your servers to crash, so you have to be able to make sure it can handle all those people. The servers are also where people are concerned about security. That's where people's accounts are stored. So you want to make sure that the games can't be hacked. and people can't cheat. There's also people, on the servers are working on the databases. That's where your accounts are, your information is actually stored. Also might be working on the multiplayer lobby or the networking that lets you see your friends moving around in an online game. A big deal is also reliability, because, if the front end coder has a bug and there's a crash, it might crash for one person's device. If the server has a crash, it could take the whole game down and everybody who's playing won't be able to play. So making servers really reliable and making sure there's no bugs and they stay up all the time so people can play anytime they want is a really big deal. And both of these parts are equally important when it comes to game programming. And really, like, if you want to work on games as an engineer, both these options could be really interesting to you. And now we're getting into my last slide. And I just want to talk about, for all of you folks who put your hands up and said you want to work on games, I want to give you some pointers as to how to do that. That's one of the questions I get asked the most by students or people who, don't work in the game industry is, how do I get a job in the game industry? How do I break in? So let's talk about a few ways to do that. One of the things I can tell you guys is that people in the game industry, it's an industry driven by passion. Nobody goes into the game industry just, to do a 9-to-5 job or to get a paycheck. All of us do it because we love games. And so if you approach someone in the game industry and just say, hey, can you tell me more about your job? Can you tell me how you got there and how you got your start? 99% of people will answer you and spend some time, because we want to support the passionate people that are coming up to be the next generation. So basically what I'm telling you here is DM people. If you, are on LinkedIn, which I don't know if you guys are, but you can find almost anybody in the game industry there. Also, if you're on Twitter or any other social media and you find someone who works in games, you can reach out to them and just ask them questions. Because the most important thing you want to figure out early on is what job in the game industry would be right for you. And then you can find out what it takes to get into that job. The next thing, which is probably the easiest bit, is you want to play games and you want to learn. You want to try a lot of different games, because you never know what kind of game you might be making. Over my career, I've made a whole bunch of different kinds of games. And you really want to play those games and think about why they work and how they work and what makes them fun and what makes them successful. Because there's tons of people who play games, but not everybody thinks about, why they're successful and has, kind of imagines what it would take to make a successful game of your own. Another thing, sort of one of the most important things is to build your skills. So once you kind of know what kind of job you might want to have, maybe you want to be an artist, maybe you want to be a programmer, maybe you want to be a game designer, you've got to learn the key skills for that job. That often involves, maybe going to coding camp, but it also may involve going to college and getting a degree in the field you want to study. Because, at this point, all of those kind of jobs require a lot of knowledge, and you've really got to spend the time to learn. And another big thing about the game industry is that it's not the kind of place where you can just get a job because you say, hey, I studied this in university, I'm ready for a job. There's lots of people who studied in university. You kind of have to stand out and show what you can do and show how passionate you are. So I really, really encourage people who are interested in games to just get their hands dirty and do something. Whether that means, again, going to a coding camp, doing some small projects. It could be doing some projects at home. You can download a free engine like Unity and start playing around. You could try making games in Roblox. Most cities have game jams that are going on that you could try to, join a team and make a game in 3 days. All of this stuff shows that you're really passionate about making games, but it also shows what you can do. And that's really important if you want to show a company that you're the right person to hire. And finally, one thing that I've seen happen, not for everybody, but sometimes people use a stepping stone to get the job they want in the game industry. For example, when I worked at Gameloft, I managed a team of people who did QA, so the people who tested the game. And one of our QA guys had a background in programming. That's what he studied in university. And during the course of his game testing, work, he started getting a chance to use his programming skills. Like he would find a bug in the game, and then he'd open up the code and look in the code and try to figure out where the bug was caused and identify it. And by doing that and working with some of the programmers, eventually he was able to move into the job he really wanted, which was to be a front-end programmer on the next game. So sometimes that, it's a little hard to the game industry isn't super huge. There's not a ton of companies in every city. So you may have to, just get your foot in the door with a QA job or as a beta tester or something like that, and eventually be able to make the jump to the job you want. And that's that. So right now, I'm going to open it up for any questions. Please ask me anything. Happy to answer. I've got my info on this slide. So if you guys want to email me afterwards, you can do that too. I'm okay with it. But ask anything you want.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. We've got a few questions in this room, actually.
Cool. Hit me.
So just say your name and your age really quick.
I'm Christian. I'm 10 years old. What
Hey,
game are
Christian.
you best at?
What game am I best at? That's a good question. I've been working on mobile games for a pretty long time. So that's recently, that's what I play the most. Let me see. I like those city builder games, where you build up your own little village, and kind of like Game of War, and then you fight other people. So those are the games I'm pretty much best at.
All right. Thank you for that. Next question over here.
Hi, I'm Kyle. What game do you recommend?
What game do you recommend?
What game for you guys to play? Well, it really depends on what you like to play. Tell me a little bit more about what kind of games you like right now.
What games do you like right now?
I don't know. Like,
He doesn't know. He wants your advice here.
Okay. How old were you?
9.
You're 9. Okay. Well, that's a good question. I'm trying to think what games are good for a 9-year-old. My son is 5, so he plays games that probably you'd find a little bit boring. Yeah, I think the best way to go is, do you like to play on console or PC or on a phone or on on a mobile device?
Like a phone, and also I play on my Nintendo Switch.
Are you playing? Well, Nintendo Switch is a great console. You can look up ask your parents to just search what are the best games on the Switch and just give them a try. There's a lot of really good stuff on the Switch, and almost all of it's geared towards kids, and you'll have a lot of fun. On the phone, yeah, I'm trying to think what might be good. I don't have any great recommendations for you, Kyle. I'd say just look in the App Store and see the games that are trending and give them a try. Part of what I found working in the game industry is you got to try everything and just check it out.
All right, thank you for that. One more question over here.
My name's Christopher, and I'm 10 years old. What's your favorite game that you made?
What's the favorite game that you made?
Thanks, Christopher. That's a great question. Honestly, I kind of like them all. My first games were a lot of fun. I worked on Ratchet and Clank, the Ratchet and Clank series, and that was when I first got started, so it was super duper exciting, and I really had a lot of fun making those games. I'll tell you kind of a secret. Once you work on games for a while, it just becomes kind of your job, and it becomes fun to make games that maybe you wouldn't necessarily play. Like when I worked on Disney Magic Kingdoms, where I had a team working on Disney Magic Kingdoms, that wasn't necessarily the game I would play the most, but it was a lot of fun to figure out what players on that game really wanted us to make and what would make them really excited. And so we'd talk to players and we'd research players and we'd try to find out what they were into, and then we'd try to make the game best for them. So, when it's your job, that's kind of what you have to do. You're not always making games for yourself. You're often making games for what other people will enjoy. But
All right, thank you for that. All All right, just say your name and your age.
Hi, I'm Duncan and I'm 9. What programming language are you most comfortable with?
Good question, Duncan. So when I started programming in games, we were using C++. Nowadays, that was quite a while ago. Nowadays, most game programmers work in an established game engine. So like if you work on Unity, you're going to work in C#, and that's pretty, a lot of people are doing that in the game industry right now. But for backend coding, it could be a lot of different things too. Like the people who code the servers work on, Python, or also like JavaScript or C# as well. So for me, probably C# would be the most comfortable right now.
All right.
Hi, I'm Tommy. I'm 8 years old.
Hey, Tommy, what's your question?
You want us to come back to you in a moment?
Yeah, I said.
Yeah,
All right.
no stress. Ask me anything you want whenever you're ready.
All right.
Hi, I'm Rosie and I'm 9. What made you wanna make games when you had to decide?
Oh, that's a good question. So actually, I got into it from programming. I went to university for programming and I didn't think I was going to make games. I actually wanted to work on AI and robotics and physics. And I went to graduate school. I thought I was going to work as a scientist in a lab. That was my initial plan. And while I was in graduate school, I did some summer jobs working in California in the game industry, working on games for the PlayStation 2. And they were just 3 months of experience working with those companies, but I fell in love with it. And after doing that for 2 summers, I decided to leave graduate school, change my dream from being a scientist to making games. And that's when I got my job at Insomniac Games and worked on the Ratchet and Clank series. So it really was, from a technical side, but it was from falling in love with actually doing it. Making games is a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool technical challenges that you have to solve, but it's with really creative, passionate people, and you get to work on stuff that makes people happy, which I really enjoyed.
All right. Thank you so much. Ishia, do you have a few questions in your room?
Yeah, we have a few questions here.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Why did you want to start making games?
Well, it's similar to the question I just answered. So I wanted to start making. Go ahead.
No,
No worries. I'll give you a good answer. So I wanted to start making games because games were fun to work on. You get to work with really passionate people who are really friendly and are all excited about making games, and you get to make things that make people happy. So when you get to see people playing your game, sometimes I've been on like the subway or a bus and I looked over and saw someone playing the game I made on their phone. And that's really fun to see people enjoying it, or, being a part of their lives.
okay. What was your first multiplayer game?
The first multiplayer that I worked on or played?
I mean, worked on.
Yeah, so I think one of the Ratchet and Clank games, Ratchet and Clank Part 3 or Part 4, was multiplayer on the PlayStation. Actually, no, that wouldn't be true. Sorry. It would be on the PlayStation 3 was the first. Gosh, it's been a while. Definitely one of the Ratchet and Clank games was multiplayer. I guess, yeah, no, it was on the PlayStation 2. And also for Resistance, Fall of Man, which is a first-person shooter, was a multiplayer game. But in those days, multiplayer was a lot simpler than it was now. I mean, it was just kind of a lobby and you could go and fight your friends. So, we definitely had multiplayer stuff, but it wasn't as sophisticated and cool as the stuff you guys have nowadays.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question here.
What role did you do in programming?
What role did I do? Good question. So because I came from a background of like AI and physics and geometry, I was a perfect fit for a front-end engineer because I studied programming, but I also studied a lot of math and physics. So that meant that like on the Ratchet and Clank games, one of the first things I did was program some enemies. Wherever Ratchet was standing, those enemies had to calculate the angles of which way to go to attack Ratchet. And they had to play animations to walk closer to him, and they had to, swing their weapons and hit him. And then when they blew up, there were little pieces that flopped around, and I had to program some of the physics of how those pieces bounced and interacted with the environment. I got to do AI, physics, VFX. So that was the kind of stuff I worked on, basically front-end game playing. I never really got into the server stuff. Oh, you know what? Since we're answering questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can see me bigger. Just realized that I still have that up on the screen.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yes, we have one more here.
So if you want a job in the gaming industry, should you go for a startup or a big company like Ubisoft? That's
a really good question. It really depends on what you want to do. If you work at a big company like Ubisoft, the jobs tend to be more stable. Startups, if you're only working on one game and that game doesn't do well, the company could be in trouble and you might be looking for another job. A big company doesn't have that problem, but at a startup, the nice thing about it is that you can make the game you're passionate about making. Oftentimes the teams, it's not, the game that Ubisoft headquarters wants you to make, it's the game that the team wants to make. And on a startup, you can, a lot of times people do a lot of different jobs. The teams are small, so you might get to try your hand on a lot of different kinds of programming. On the other hand, if you work at a big company like Ubisoft on a giant team, you're probably going to work on one small piece of the game. And that could be a little less fun. So they both have their different advantages. So honestly, I think both experiences are good. And it really depends on what you want to make.
Thank you. We have, I think, 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Sanjeet and I'm 15.
Cool.
And I was wondering, do you think video game graphics kind of peaked, or is there going to be a new advancement in them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And now you're asking me to kind of make some guesses. So, I wouldn't take this answer too seriously, but we've seen a thing in music where music kept getting higher and higher quality, from records to tapes to CDs. And then MP3s came out, and MP3s are actually lower quality than CDs, but nobody cares because we've already hit the limit of what your ear can tell the difference of. With video game graphics, we might hit the same point. On the latest 4K ultra high def TV, it's almost as good as your eyes can see, and making it more detailed might be, there might not be a good reason for it. And part of what we've seen on mobile games is a little bit of that backslide. Like the most famous games on mobile are not the games with the craziest graphics. Like games like Candy Crush or Clash of Clans are simple games, but the reason they've been successful is not because of the graphics, it's been because of the gameplay and the way they connect people, or the way they become a part of people's lives. So I think it's going to be different on different platforms. Consoles are always going to be pushing the boundaries and getting more and more detailed and more kind of advanced, because what consoles are trying to give you is an experience like playing your favorite movie. Like you see these Marvel movies that are super, super cool, and a console is basically like that. You sit in front of your TV and you play through that kind of experience. But right now, as I showed you earlier, mobile games are the biggest chunk of the game industry. And in that area, they're not trying to replicate, the experience of watching a Marvel movie. They're trying to give you a little game experience on your phone, and graphics aren't going to be the biggest draw for that. It's going to be the gameplay. That make sense?
What's the most complex game you've ever created?
Wow, good question. It would probably be some of the strategy games I worked at with Kabam. So these were multiplayer games. They had, hundreds and hundreds of players in a level, and people would be battling each other, creating cities and attacking each other. Those would probably be the most complex, but every game has different kinds of complexity. there's very few simple games nowadays. Everything, to attract players, it's very competitive. And, even a game that seems simple often has a lot of stuff going on in it in terms of, how the gameplay is created, the different game modes and the different systems that are in there. So if you want to be on a successful game, almost all of them are pretty complicated. But I'd say the city builders are probably among the more complex ones I've worked on.
My name is James, and what is your favorite video game to play, and what do you play it on?
Oh, good question. All-time favorites would probably be some old PC games that you guys probably don't play. Like I really fell in love with Fallout 2 and then Fallout Shelter. Those were amazing RPGs. I just love the heck out of them. As I said, nowadays mostly I play games on mobile. Yeah, so I keep up to date on the stuff that's going on mobile. Like I played Genshin Impact. I played the new Diablo game on mobile. So I try to keep in touch on new stuff that's going on and play it. So mobile's my jam now, but my all-time favorites were definitely PC games. Although I do have a very fond, warm place in my heart for old NES games I played when I was a kid, just because of the nostalgia factor. It kind of reminds me of being a kid in front of the TV and getting a game for Christmas. So.
My name is Cameron, and how many games have you made?
Whoa, good question. Let me think. Let me actually look at this slide I had for you guys, and that doesn't have all of them. It gets a little fuzzy because at the beginning of my career, I was working directly on games. Like when I worked on Ratchet and Clank Part 2, Ratchet and Clank Part 3, Ratchet and Clank Part 4, Resistance. So like there was like a run of about 6 or 7 games where I was directly working on just one project. After a while, though, I started leading bigger and bigger teams. Like right now, I lead all of the game designers at a company called Amber, and the company is about 1,000 people, and have designers working on 20 projects at the same time. So I'm not directly involved on any of those 20 projects, but I lead the teams that make them. So it gets a little fuzzy. So I would say somewhere around 15 to 20 games are the ones I've worked on. And nowadays it's like, I'm less connected to the games themselves and more about leading the teams that make them.
Hi, my name is Adam. What was the first game company you worked for?
So the first game company I worked at full-time, not for a summer gig, was called Insomniac Games, and they're still around now. So I worked on them when we were working on Ratchet and Clank and Resistance, but they recently released that Spider-Man game that did really, really well. So they're still going quite strong. But before that, when I was doing a couple of summer jobs, I worked at Rockstar and worked on a Spy Hunter game with them. And before that, I worked with Sony on a company called 989 Studios. And we actually I was part of the team that made a hockey game for them. And I was working on the AI for the hockey players and the kind of cloth physics for the back of the hockey net. So when you shot the puck in the net would wiggle. On the PlayStation 2, that was a very big deal. Nowadays, not so much, because the consoles have gotten so much better since then.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have some more questions in the other room.
Sure, go for it.
Thank you so much for your time. We have a few more questions over here.
Cool.
All right, so we're coming back to Tommy. Tommy, do you remember your question now?
Yeah.
All right, so what's your question?
Actually, it's half question, half comment.
Okay.
My dad made Elemental George. Have you ever played it?
Wait, say that again?
It's a game called Elemental George.
Elemental George. Yeah. Your dad works on it. Really? Tommy, that's a great question and a great comment. I'm going to look it up right now. I don't know that one. What does your dad do on that game?
Actually, it's already been created and but now you basically, now when you play it, you basically it's really old, and when you play it, so there's robot, and it's kind of like rock paper scissors, but with elements like earth,
Like fire,
the
ice, and stuff like that?
no, but not ice, like fire, fire,
Earth,
fire,
water.
And earth, maybe? Yeah. That game sounds really cool. Did your dad make the whole game by himself?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So
Wow.
he's an example of that team I talked about, similar to Minecraft, where it's one person making the whole game. That's very, very cool. Thanks for sharing.
All right, next is just say your name and your age.
I'm Sasha and I'm 9. What was the first ever game you made?
The first ever game I made for like a real game company was NHL 2002. So it was a hockey game. That's the one where I worked on the player AI and the wiggly back of the hockey net cloth. And it was actually, so I think when we worked on it, it was called NHL 2001, but it got delayed by a year and released in 2002. And that was the first game I ever worked on that ever got released. Obviously, when I was in school, I did some game projects for fun as well, but the professional one was NHL. And then the first game I worked on full time was Ratchet & Clank Part 2.
I think we have a few more questions over here.
Hi, my name's Alina and I'm 10. What was your favorite game that you've made?
Yeah, good question. I like them all. I really enjoyed working on the Ratchet & Clank series because they were really fun games, and that was when I first got my start in the industry, so everything was super new and exciting. But I liked working on almost all the games I've worked on.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Garber. That is all of our questions over here, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to all of the kids here. Can everyone say a quick bye to Mr. Garber?
So,
all right, thank you so much.
No worries. And I just want to remind everybody that if you really want to learn more about games, please keep asking questions. If you know of anybody who works in the game industry, if you have questions for me, don't worry. Don't be afraid to reach out and keep asking more questions about how you can prepare yourself for that kind of a job. And I'd be happy to connect you to people who could help you out.
Great. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.